3 placements in 14 months, Marlene Cross said, sitting across from me as if the 9-year-old beside her weren't listening. Nora refuses affection. She wakes up screaming. She makes accusations she can't explain. Nora sat rigidly on my sofa, both arms wrapped around a battered backpack. Marlene lowered her voice. You shouldn't expect a normal relationship with her. I watched Nora's fingers tighten around the straps. The placement worker glanced at her paperwork. Her previous families described significant behavioral difficulties. Damaged, Marlene added softly. That's probably the most accurate word. Nora flinched. That was enough. Please don't call her that in my house. Marlene blinked. Excuse me. Nora is sitting 3 feet away from you. Her polite smile vanished. I've known my niece her entire life, Ms. Leiker. And she can decide for herself what kind of relationship she wants with me. For the first time since entering my home, Nora looked directly at me. Marlene gathered her papers. You're new to fostering. You'll understand eventually. Maybe. But I already understood one thing. Everyone kept describing Nora's silence as the problem while nobody seemed interested in why she had stopped talking. After the placement worker and Marlene left, I didn't question Nora. I showed her the bedroom I had prepared, pointed out where the towels were, and said, You don't have to talk to me tonight. She stared at me suspiciously. I mean it. I returned to the kitchen. Almost 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Nora stood in the doorway, clutching something besides her backpack. A wrinkled photograph. She placed it carefully on the table. The picture showed a younger woman holding a toddler outside, what looked like a hospital entrance. Nora touched the woman's face. That was my mom. It was the first sentence she had offered me without being asked. What was her name? Elena. I slid the photograph back toward her. You can keep it wherever you feel safest. Her eyes stayed on mine. Other people touch my things. I won't. She hesitated, then pushed the photograph toward me again. You can look. I carefully unfolded one crushed corner. Something plastic slipped from behind the photograph and landed on the table. A faded hospital identification bracelet. Yelena Vale. Below the name was a patient number and an admission date. Was this your mom's? Nora snatched it up. Her entire posture changed. Okay, I said immediately. Nobody's taking it. She stuffed it behind the photograph and disappeared down the hallway. That reaction stayed with me. But I didn't understand why until that evening. My brother Daniel came over carrying a toolbox. At 39, Daniel was the person I called whenever furniture arrived with 40 screws and instructions that somehow required 6 hands. You bought the complicated bed again, didn't you? He asked. It looked easier online. While he opened the box, I told him briefly about Nora. Then I picked up the photograph she had left on the kitchen counter. This is her mother. Daniel glanced at it. His screwdriver stopped. Jossette. What? He took the photograph from me. All the humor disappeared from his face. Where did you get this? Nora brought it. He unfolded the corner. The hospital bracelet slid into his palm. Daniel read the name. Then the date. He read it again. His face went pale. Daniel, what is it? He didn't answer. He grabbed his coat from the chair. Why do you recognize her? Still nothing. Then I noticed movement behind him. Nora stood in the hallway, watching us. Daniel saw her too. He looked from Nora to Elena's bracelet, then back at me. Wait, he whispered. He shoved his phone into his pocket. Jossette, we need to go, right now. Go where? I asked. Daniel looked toward Nora again, then lowered his voice. Not here. I need to explain this somewhere she can't overhear. No. His eyebrows lifted. Jossette. She already thinks adults whisper about her. I'm not leaving her standing in my hallway while we disappear to discuss her life. Nora's hand tightened around the photograph. Daniel exhaled and crouched several feet away from her. Nora, can I ask you one question? She didn't answer. He pointed gently toward the bracelet. Did your mother give you that? Nora immediately pulled the photograph against her chest and hid the bracelet behind her back. Marlene said I'm not supposed to show it. I felt my stomach tighten. Why? Nora looked down. She said people would think I stole it from the hospital. Daniel and I exchanged a glance. It was an old identification bracelet, worthless to almost anyone. So why had Marlene cared enough to frighten a child into hiding it? Nora, I said, nobody here is taking it from you. She studied my face for several seconds. Then she whispered, when I talked about Mom's hospital before, Aunt Marlene always came. Daniel went completely still. What do you mean? At the other houses. Nora's voice was barely audible now. I told one lady about Mom's room. Then Aunt Marlene came the next day. And after that, I asked. They moved me. A cold silence settled over the room. Daniel stood and pulled me toward the kitchen. I know Alina Vale. I stared at him. How? She came to the legal aid office where I worked years ago. She wanted help with something involving Nora. What kind of help? I don't know enough yet to say. Daniel. I'm serious. I remember the name and her face, but I need the intake file before I start accusing anyone. He pulled out his phone. My mind raced back through everything Marlene had said. 3 failed placements. Delusions. Behavioral problems. A child who supposedly couldn't be trusted. What if all those placements weren't failing because of Nora? Daniel looked at me. That's exactly what I'm worried about. He called his former office and requested Alina Vale's archived intake record. While he was still speaking, Nora appeared behind us. This time, she held the photograph open. She walked to the table and pointed at the blurry hospital entrance behind Alina. Then her finger moved to a figure standing far in the background. A woman. Even blurred, I recognized her. Marlene. Nora looked up at me. She was there. Daniel ended the call. According to Marlene, she hadn't arrived until after Alina died. So why was she already standing outside the hospital? The next morning, Marlene was sitting in my living room before I had even finished making coffee. She wasn't supposed to be there. The foster care caseworker, Ms. Reeves, had arrived for Nora's scheduled review. Marlene had somehow learned I was asking questions and appeared minutes later. I'm concerned, Marlene said calmly. Jossette is becoming emotionally involved far too quickly. I stared at her. I've had Nora for one night. Exactly. Nora sat beside me, silent. Marlene turned to Ms. Reeves. This is what happens. Nora becomes comfortable, then she starts telling frightening stories. If those stories are encouraged, her behavior deteriorates. What stories? Ms. Reeves asked. Marlene glanced at Nora. Delusions about her mother. Nora's shoulders folded inward. Then Marlene said, I recommend another placement before Jossette reinforces them. I finally understood how she did it. She never called Nora a liar. She called her sick and let everyone else reach the same conclusion. No, I said. Marlene's eyes narrowed. I reached into the drawer beside me and removed Alina's hospital bracelet. The instant Marlene saw it, her composure cracked. Where did you get that? She stood and reached for it. I pulled my hand back. That belongs to the hospital. Ms. Reeves frowned. Why does an old bracelet matter? Marlene opened her mouth. Nothing came out. A knock sounded at the door. Daniel entered carrying several copied pages. I found Alina Vale's intake file. Marlene went pale. Daniel placed the first page in front of Ms. Reeves. Elena contacted my former legal aid office 11 days before the date on that bracelet. He tapped one paragraph. She reported unauthorized withdrawals from a protected medical settlement belonging to Nora. That woman was confused, Marlene snapped. Elena was unstable. Daniel slowly turned another document around. Then perhaps you can explain why one of the disputed withdrawal authorizations lists your administrative contact information. Silence. Ms. Reeves read the page twice. Then she closed Nora's placement folder. Marlene, effective immediately, your involvement in Nora's placement is suspended pending review. Marlene stared at me. The professional smile was gone. She grabbed her purse and walked out without another word. For the first time, she had lost control of the room. My phone chimed seconds later. A notification from Nora's school. I opened it. Then I was already reaching for my keys. Marlene had arrived at Nora's school, asking to sign her out. Call the school, I told Daniel as I ran for the car. Ms. Reeves was already on her phone behind us. I'm notifying administration that Marlene's authorization has been suspended. Daniel and I reached the school minutes later. Nora was still inside. The receptionist met us near the office. Ms. Cross tried to sign her out, but we received the caseworker's notice before Nora was released. Where's Marlene? I asked. She left when the principal told her no. For the first time, Marlene's title and professional reputation hadn't opened the door she wanted. Nora came into the office and walked straight to me. In the car, she finally spoke. I remember the hospital. Daniel turned slightly in his seat. Nora stared at the bracelet in her hands. Aunt Marlene came into Mom's room with a folder. Mom got angry. What did she say? I asked. Nora swallowed. Mom said that money belongs to Nora. She remembered Marlene leaving later, with papers taken from Elena's bedside drawer. Afterward, Marlene warned her that if she talked about that night, people would think she was sick like her mother. Back home, Daniel placed Elena's archived documents beside the bracelet. He compared the patient number and admission date. Then he stopped. Marlene's timeline is wrong. Elena had entered the hospital earlier than Marlene had claimed. That mattered because documents bearing Elena's electronic approval had been processed, while hospital records indicated she was incapacitated. The bracelet doesn't prove who moved the money, Daniel said, but it proves we need the underlying records. Ms. Reeves escalated the case. Investigators reviewed Nora's previous placement notes and found the same pattern again and again. Whenever Nora mentioned her mother's hospital stay, Marlene requested a reassessment. Soon afterward, Nora was moved. She hadn't been shuffled through homes because she was broken. Keeping her unstable had kept her story fragmented. Investigators secured the settlement records before any more money could be moved. Then the transaction history was opened. Daniel stared at the screen. He didn't say a word. He simply turned it toward me. The transaction history filled the screen. Daniel pointed to one transfer, then another. This is what Elena was trying to stop. Nora's protected settlement had been created after a serious childhood accident. Elena was allowed to manage it, but the money legally existed for one purpose: Nora's future care. Marlene had helped Elena navigate medical paperwork. That access gave her personal information, account details, and administrative records. Investigators eventually established what Elena had discovered before she died. Fraudulent authorizations had been submitted using her identity and signature, and substantial amounts had been routed through accounts controlled by Marlene. Elena had gone to Daniel's former legal aid office as soon as she realized money was disappearing. Then she suffered a medical emergency. Her hospitalization had given Marlene something she desperately needed: a way to attack Elena's credibility. But the bracelet changed everything. Daniel laid Elena's legal aid intake record beside the hospital records. Look at the dates. Alina had reported the unauthorized withdrawals before her condition deteriorated. The electronic authorization logs created an even bigger problem for Marlene. Documents supposedly approved by Alina had been processed during a period when hospital records showed she was incapacitated. The bracelet had never been valuable because of the plastic itself. It was valuable because it anchored the timeline Marlene had tried to rewrite. And Nora had carried it through every placement. After Alina died, Marlene faced another problem. Nora remembered. She couldn't erase a 9-year-old child, so she destroyed the child's credibility instead. Whenever Nora mentioned Alina's hospital room, Marlene described it as another disturbing story. Whenever Nora began trusting a foster family enough to speak, Marlene pushed for reassessment. 3 disrupted placements became evidence against Nora. Her silence became another diagnosis. Her fear became behavior. And eventually, adults stopped asking whether the quiet girl might actually be telling the truth. Weeks later, Ms. Reeves sat with Nora and me at the kitchen table. She closed the corrected case file. "Nora, there are things the adults responsible for you should have investigated much sooner." Nora stared at her mother's photograph. Then she looked at me. So Mom wasn't lying. I moved from my chair and knelt beside her. "No." Her chin trembled. "She was trying to protect you." Nora didn't cry or suddenly throw her arms around me. She simply carried the photograph upstairs. A few minutes later, I passed her bedroom and stopped. For as long as I had known her, Nora had hidden that picture inside her backpack. Now it stood openly on her dresser. The investigation continued. Marlene was removed from her administrative position while authorities examined the financial evidence. The records led to fraud and theft-related charges. She lost every remaining authority she had over Nora and was prohibited from contacting her. The settlement was frozen immediately. Funds were recovered where possible, and what remained was transferred into an independently supervised trust so no relative could control it again. Nora's foster care record was corrected too. The descriptions that had followed her from home to home were put into context. Her silence, fear, and resistance were recognized as responses to coercion and repeated instability, not proof that she was inherently damaged. Months passed. Nora stayed with me. Then the court made me her permanent guardian. When adoption eventually became legally possible, I asked her what she wanted. She stared at me across the kitchen table. Would I have to move again? No. Even if I'm quiet. I smiled. Especially then. She nodded once. Okay. On adoption day, Daniel met us outside the courthouse. He looked at Nora and suddenly laughed softly. "What?" I asked. He nodded toward her hands. Nothing was in them. No battered backpack. No belongings packed tightly enough to grab at a moment's notice. Nora noticed too. She slipped her hand into mine. At home, we placed Alina's hospital bracelet inside a small keepsake box beside her photograph. It wasn't evidence we needed to chase anymore. It belonged to Nora now simply because it was part of her mother's story, and hers. Nora remained quiet. That was never something she needed fixed. But now, when she had something to say, she knew the adults around her would stop and listen. Everyone had called Nora broken because she barely spoke, but the moment someone finally listened, the truth spoke for her.